All right, so we're looking here at the Declaration of Independence. So you'll want to either have printed a copy of the Declaration of Independence, and maybe I gave you one in class. I don't know. Or you can use a Google Doc and then just kind of follow along with me and highlight and do the things that I do. So you've got a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Really simple. It's one page. I kind of edited it down here. We're not going to read every aspect of it, but this is like our first foundational document, and you're going to have to be able to recall key points from the Declaration of Independence and use them in an argumentative essay. So it's really critical that you understand the Declaration. And here's the thing: you're an American. You should understand the Declaration of Independence and its importance here. So, of course, the Declaration signed in 1776 in Congress, July 4th, 1776 is when it was adopted. And so let's just go through it here. And I'm going to stop and I'm going to make some comments. And you're going to go ahead and do that as well on your sheet. And so let's go through this. Okay, so it starts with in the course of human events. So, meaning like history, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's gods entitles them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. So, declare the causes which impel them. Here they're just gonna give reasons. All right, so they're giving, and I can't type well with my microphone right here. They're gonna give some reasons. Why are we declaring independence? That's what we're talking about here. Why are we going to do it? All right, so we start off with very, very famous words that are so influential. They inspire all kinds of different movements in the United States. First and foremost among them are going to be the anti-slavery movement or the abolitionist movement, which will start very, very quickly after the writing of these words, because people are going to realize, like, well, wait a second, how can we declare these rights when we have a group of people, Africans, who are held as slaves? And so, very quickly, in the United States, people are going to realize that inconsistency and begin to want slavery gotten rid of. And this is important because every country, every society, every culture has had slavery, and slavery was just endemic throughout the world at this point. But it's these words that are written, or we're about to read. It is these words that will inspire the anti-slavery movement, and very quickly, in the same year of 1776, and it'll be adopted in 1777, Vermont will become the first place in world history to actually declare slavery illegal. And then other states will follow suit as well. So let's read these words because they are that important. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. is going to use these words as well when he argues for the rights of African Americans, and the ending of segregation. So these words are important. They're important for the civil rights movement. As I just mentioned, they're important for the women's rights movement. People are going to use these words because they are a promise, and that promise wasn't kept at the beginning of our country, but there's something that people have really held on to as meaningful. So really important words here. Okay, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All right, first off, highlight self-evident. Something that's self-evident in this context means it's obvious. And it's obvious if you use reason. Like if you just stop and think about it, then it's pretty obvious. What are these obvious truths? That all men are created equal. And let me just stop for a second there. Yes, they meant Africans. Yes, they did. Yes, they meant blacks. Matter of fact, because they meant blacks, because it said all men, again, as I referenced, this started the anti slavery movement. There had been nobody caring much about ending slavery prior to the Declaration, but it was the Declaration and these words that people realized, like, oh, wow, we are really inconsistent, and we need to do something about that. Now, did they end up abolishing slavery everywhere? No. Did it get abolished as a result of these words and people realizing that we needed to be consistent with these words? Yes, it did. And eventually it led to a civil war. So all men are created equal. They are endowed. Okay, so here we go. Endowed. Endowed means to be given. And by the way, to be endowed with something is like, it's like you're born with it. All right. By their creator, obviously here, God. by their creator, by God, with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable rights. These are rights that cannot be taken away. Unalienable rights, rights that can't be taken away. Why can't they be taken away? Well, one, you're born with them. All right. The second reason they can't be taken away is because you got them from God. All right. There was this concept back in before the Enlightenment, or actually right at the beginning of the Enlightenment. It was called divine right. And it was the divine right of kings. And the idea was that God gave the right for the king to rule. And therefore, you should obey the king. Why? Because God put them there. Oh, wait a second. How do I know God put them there? Because they're there. And if you don't like it, shut up, because the king can just kill you. It really kind of goes along with Thomas's Hobbes idea that you just have like a Leviathan who controls everything and God put them there and therefore you should listen and therefore we have peace. In this, it's a little bit opposite. It doesn't say that the king has these rights from God. Here, Jefferson is writing that the people have rights from God and they're unalienable. They can't be taken away by the government. Okay. And what are these rights? They are rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that's huge. Pursuit of happiness, by the way, in the original, Locke said it was property. They have this right to go out, pursue happiness, do what you want, have liberty, accumulate property if that's what you want, or not accumulate property if that's what you don't want. And that's that. Okay, cool. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So, in order to secure these rights, we create government. Governments are instituted, meaning formed. Form government to protect rights. Remember from the last lesson, talk about this idea of the state of nature. And in this state of nature, both Hobbes and then eventually Locke talked about how like anything could happen to you. You could murder, people could murder you, they could steal. It didn't matter. But now we form a government. Why? To protect these rights. We protect our life. Okay, to protect our liberty, our freedom to go do things. I mean, if you're scared to go outside because chaos is happening, then you lost your liberty. You have no liberty. All right, and then also to pursue your happiness and accumulate property. Like government must protect that. Otherwise, it's just chaos, and we won't have any freedom, and therefore we'll have nothing. Like there will be no businesses. No one will open a business if the government doesn't protect property and these sort of things. All right, and that's what the Declaration is saying. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So that's pretty huge right there. Government has to have consent. And that means the people vote. All right, the people vote. They have to have some sort of consent. That when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, okay, so destructive of these ends, that should be pretty clear, like violates. But if they violate these rights, these ends, life, liberty, property, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government. So we have the right to replace bad. And by the way, just to be clear, bad government is defined here as a government that violates your rights. Okay, government that violates your rights. And institute a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall be most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So, you're going to go back, you're going to form a new government, you're going to organize it in somehow. That way, it shall give them safety and happiness. And in this case, of course, the founders are going to create separation of powers. They're going to go back to that Montesquieu idea, and they're going to make sure that the government is organized in such a way that your rights are protected. Right? Prudence. Prudence is like the idea of not acting rashly, taking your time. Indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. So you don't do it for nothing. You don't do it for a little thing. Okay. Government does, it has to be something big. Um, the cause of revolution, cause to overthrow must be serious. You can't just overthrow it for light and transient. You just like something, one day we're all mad and we're all ticked off and we're in the streets yelling, but that's not a reason necessarily to get rid of our government. And according to all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while those evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So here's what I'm saying. We're more likely to just like suffer through bad things than we are to abolish those things. And why? Because we're used to it. We're just like, yeah, I'm used to it. I'm kind of used to getting abused. People often ask, like, well, why don't the North Koreans like overthrow their government? I mean, well, one, fear. That's obvious. Concentration camps that do that to you. But the other reason is they're used to it. Like, I mean, they're used to it. You just kind of keep dealing with it. So we're not likely to do that. Um, in one, if we overthrow the government, we have chaos. Chaos may be worse, right? Anarchy in the streets, burning of houses and looting of businesses and burning stuff and destroying things and overturning cars and shootings and whatever it would be. That might be worse than, keeping the government you got. So you don't do it for small reasons. That's what Jefferson's writing. All right. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations. Okay, so here we go. So this is long-term violations of rights. So if we have a long train of abuses and usurpations, a bunch of violations of rights, then maybe we will overthrow the government. And that's what he's arguing. He's arguing that this has been a long time coming. This is not just for small reasons. This is a big deal. Pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. So if you have these long train of abuses, this long-term violations of rights that reduce you to absolute despotism, where you basically just under despotism, which is like tyranny, all-powerful government, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So new guards, are going to be, you can kind of think of them as, separation of powers. Make sure that new government doesn't violate the rights. So you're going to change the law. You're going to create a new framework, maybe a constitution to do that. New guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. He's like, look, we've been suffering for so long. We've had this king doing crazy stuff. Like, we're not going to take it anymore. You know that old 80s song? We're not going to take it. We're not going to take it. No. I should get my guitar out. All right. And so such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. And such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. So, like, you know what? We're going to stop. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And then there's a list of grievances. And of course, grievances are complaints. And so there's a bunch of complaints through here about all the things the king has done, and he's taxed them without representation. He's sent them off to England for trial without a jury of their peers from this area. All these different things. The port of Boston being taken over by British troops. All these things are usurpations. All these things have created absolute tyranny in the colony. So therefore, they have a right to get rid of it. And at the end of it, I just think it's important to highlight this at the end. And for this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, which obviously is another flowery way of saying God, protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors. And why is that important? It's important because these men signing this, the 56 men who signed it, knew that by putting their name on this document, they were making themselves a target. And if the colonies lost, they would all be executed. In fact, a couple funny things from the Declaration signing. You probably heard this before, but John Hancock, who's of course famous for his big, signature that he writes, he was asked why he wrote his name so large on the Declaration, and he said so that way the King of England could read it without his spectacles or his glasses. And so that's pretty awesome. Like, I just want to be able to read it. That's brave. That's bravery. How many of us would put our name on a document, and then because we put our name on it, know that the British Army is coming for us and probably will burn our house and destroy everything we own? I mean, we just don't make those decisions today, right? Like, I'm going to put something out that's going to get my house destroyed. That's going to get all my property taken, and likely will get me, the end of a noose. In fact, Benjamin Franklin said to all the men, "Well, men, we must hang together, or we shall all hang separately." Meaning, if we don't stick together and win this, we're all going to hang at the end of a noose by ourselves. So Declaration, really phenomenal document. We'll talk more about it and its influence and its importance, especially related to the all-important anti-slavery movement, women's rights movements, other movements that have used all men are created equal and have been inspired by it. Okay, great. So that's for that. We're going to go to the second document here. You should have a document that looks like this called Declaration Required Document. I'm going to do that in the next video. But you're going to go ahead and get this out, and you're going to type that out, or I'm probably giving you a copy of it. So we're going to do that next. Thanks.